Alright guys, so we're going to go ahead and finish up our nervous system notes today. I know we've been focusing a lot on the brain recently, especially in the second half of the chapter, but we're going to go ahead and just finish up talking about some of the other nerves, including the very important spinal cord and some of the nerves that come off of it. Not all of them, but some of them. Now, your spinal cord, we know, runs, well, down your spine. And one thing that most people don't understand, so we know that it's one solid structure, but it does not stay one solid structure the entire time. So our spinal cord will extend from the brainstem, the medulla oblongata to be specific, because that's the lower half or lower portion of our brainstem, and it will run all the way down to the T12 vertebrae, remember thoracic 12. So really, your spinal cord, the true part of your spinal cord, will stop before you even get to your lower back. Now that doesn't mean that you don't have nerves in your lower body, you obviously do, but they're no longer going to be bound in this cord-like structure. Okay, so below the T12 is the region we call the cauda equina part of the spinal cord. And if we take that Latin word and translate it, cauda means tail, equina means equine, or horse as we commonly call them. So it literally translates to horse tail because of the appearance that we see here. Okay, it has that frayed appearance that medical doctors named at one point after the tail of a horse. And so as that fraying occurs, okay, that's how your nerves kind of start to separate out and go either down the front of the pelvis into the legs or behind the pelvis and into the legs. Notice in the tailbone, like the true tailbone, we don't actually have any nerves in the tailbone, just at the base of it. Okay. Now with your spinal cord is about the diameter of your thumb. So it's not huge. Okay, it's not really wide, it's fairly small in the grand scheme of things, actually. And it's not consistent from top to bottom. There are two enlargements in particular where the spinal cord will go from being like 1 thumb diameter to like 1.5 to 2 times the diameter of your thumb. Okay. And where we see those, you see them in the cervical area where a lot of the arm nerves are coming into play, and a lot of the arm nerves are entering into the spinal cord here, and then they get kind of like reorganized or rebound together, bound together better as we get further up or down. And then we see another enlargement of our spinal cord, like a natural enlargement, in the lumbar region, and that's where we see the cauda equina start to form. We also see that a lot of the nerves from like the abdominal region are going to come into play right here. And then they'll be bound better as they move upwards. Okay. So spinal cord is not one consistent diameter the entire way down. Okay. Now just like our brain, so remember your brain has white matter and gray matter. Your spinal cord will also have white matter and gray matter. So what you're looking at, so this is a cross-section of a spinal cord, and this is the part that would be running through the holes in the vertebrae that we learned about in our bone chapter. Okay, those vertebral canals. The white matter is on the outside, so it's external. And this is where a lot of the conduction tracts are. So a lot of like the axons for the nerves and the dendrites are found in the white matter. Okay, right here. The gray matter is going to be on the inside part, so you can't really even see it from the outside. You'd have to cut into it to see the gray matter. So the gray matter is on the inside, and it's mostly composed of cell bodies, similar to our brain, where we find like the nucleus and mainly that's about it actually, just cell bodies. Remember, we're like not myelinated here, okay, because we're in the spinal cord and not the brain. Okay, we'll review that again before we get to the end of this chapter. But with the dorsal horns and the anterior horns, so there's two parts to your gray matter. There's this part which points towards the back, okay, and actually has like a horn-like appearance, okay? That is the dorsal horns, and the anterior horns, not quite as horn-like, but they're towards the front. And the reason why we kind of point these two structures out in our gray matter is whenever there are injuries to the spinal cord, these two areas are very important for the collection and transmittance of nerves. So they're always very wary of those two areas when there's damage to the spinal cord, okay, or if there's suspected damage to the spinal cord. All right. And then in the very middle of this, okay, similar to what we saw in our bone chapter when we were looking at bone cells, and there was a central canal in the middle of the bone cell. Well, there's also a central canal in your spinal cord, and it's right here in the very middle. Now, it's not just an empty space, it is filled with cerebral spinal fluid, a very small amount of cerebral spinal fluid, but that fluid helps to absorb any shock that might be there. So there's actually fluid on the outside of the spinal cord, like being contained within the bone. There's also cerebral spinal fluid on the inside, so it's almost like there's that watery, cushiony material on the inside and outside, cushioning the spinal cord as best as it can. All right. So with your spinal cord anatomy, remember we talked about some of these meninges before. Okay, it's been a little while, right before brain disorders, but meninges we talked about when we were talking about the covering of the brain. Well, the spinal cord will also have meninges as covering, okay, kind of protective layers. The nerves, what's different about the spinal cord and the brain, okay, the brain, all of the nerves of the brain kind of enter and exit through the brain stem. With the spinal cord, we've got like branches coming off of the spinal cord in multiple directions, okay? So with the spinal cord, we have a dorsal root, okay? And the dorsal root is going to be associated with the dorsal root ganglia, and these are going to be obviously the ones that are pointing towards the back. And so if you look here, we've got front of the body, back of the body, okay? Here's our spinal cord. Here's your dorsal root, so there's actually a branch bringing messages in towards the dorsal horns right here, okay? And then it would send it up towards the brain would figure out what to do, send it back down to the spinal cord, and if it was going in that same location, the anterior or the ventral horns will then send the messages back. So it's almost like a roundabout, if you've seen those before. They kind of scare me while I'm driving, but it's almost kind of like a roundabout where they go, they enter spinal cord, they shoot up to brain, they shoot back down, and then they come back out. Okay. Of course, depends on what we're needing to do in human body, but that's what we see. Okay. Man, I hate when my pictures get messed up. I can fix it real quick. All right, the ventral or the anterior, because remember ventral and anterior are just they're synonyms for each other. The ventral is where we see, there we go, most of the messages coming back from the brain and heading back out towards that area. Okay, it's kind of like that way we have, almost like a one-way street. Okay, it goes in one way, it comes out one way. This way your body can work as efficiently as possible and there's not any like mixed messages going on. Okay. And then this last part, I don't remember if I have it in the fill-in notes or not, but I think it's good information to at least hear once. Sometimes I've taken it out of note packets before, okay? But with your cranial nerves, I know I usually have the introduction in there. There are 12 important pairs of cranial nerves that we find in the bottom of the brain area, okay? And they are numbered in order from front to back, and most of them are going to be what we call mixed nerves, meaning that they're sensory and motor neurons, okay? But 3 of the nerves are sensory nerves only. So you can kind of see them. I've got a better picture coming up. These nerves are just a lot of the sensory nerves, okay, up here at the front. So olfactory, your sense of smell, optic nerve, okay, remember we're far up on the bottom of the brain here, okay, because this is the underside of the brain. The other nerve that aids in your sensory is going to be, there it is, your trochlear nerve, okay? So that is actually going to help with like the ability to hear too. If you've heard of people getting trochlear implants before to aid in the ability to hear, they actually take the trochlear implant, which is sometimes looks like a little earpiece, okay? They will take that, they'll put it in the ear, and then you'll see wires winding from the top of that earpiece and actually going into the head, right about like 1.5 inches behind the ear. And it's actually connecting into that trochlear nerve. Okay, so if someone is born deaf or if they have really poor hearing, okay, to the point of being pretty much deaf or only being able to hear certain things, sometimes they opt to get a trochlear implant, okay, which allows them to be able to hear actually fairly well. So it's different from a hearing aid. Hearing aids act like little microphones almost that amplify the sound. Trochlear implants actually help to collect vibrations and help the brain with interpreting those vibrations. Okay. So hearing aids are more for if you're just hard of hearing, kind of like when old people lose their ability to hear very well. Trochlear implants would be something like a child is born deaf, and they might be applicable to getting, or they might be able to get a trochlear implant. Okay. We see kind of here, and I don't usually go into a lot of detail with these, but a lot of the nerves, the super important nerves, we find here at the bottom of the brain. Okay, for sense, sight, ocular motor means the muscles that allow your eyes to move back and forth. Okay, trochlear we've talked about. Even not so much just the senses, but a lot of the muscular, even the primitive functions, so like lungs and digestion, okay, are all found here at the bottom of the brain, which is why it's almost sometimes better to have an injury towards the top or the front of the brain as opposed to the bottom of the brain, because we have all these important cranial nerves here and your very important brainstem.